My name is Sarah Bramble, and I'm the head of adult services at the Dobbs Ferry Public Library. This is my first week back in the library, like 15 months. I'm so happy to offer this program online on Zoom. And what a year we've had. Authors with new books out had to suspend their book tours or move them online to Zoom. Librarians who offered programs to the public in person learned to team up with other libraries and collaborate with other organizations to offer virtual science, art, and cultural programs online. And when the pandemic hit, Delane Michelle created a new organization beneficial to authors and readers with Book Yaya, an online marketplace where authors can offer live appearances online using video conference technology in person to a wide audience of readers and book lovers. She then partnered with many of the 38 libraries in the Westchester Library System to provide access to free showings of these author visits and interviews. In the spirit of collaboration, the Westchester Library System teamed up and offered libraries to co-host with her. Let me just give you a few points about Delane in case you didn't know. She's an American author and actress. She was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and raised into a literary family, including Andre Debut III, James Lee Burke, and Alfred Burke. Michelle moved to New York City and did some modeling there and took some acting classes with teachers who had taught at Yale Drama School, Juilliard, the Actors Studio, and Neighborhood Playhouse. And then she moved to Los Angeles and appeared in such shows as NYPD Blue, Judging Amy, and the Gilmore Girls. And in 1996, she created Spoken Interludes, a critically acclaimed reading series where award-winning, best-selling, and upcoming writers can read their work to the audience who loves them. Delane?
Oh, well, that was so incredibly sweet of you, Sarah. Thank you so much for that lovely and surprising introduction about what my husband and I did by creating Book Yaya. The lion's share of the work was his. I'm very proud of him and thankful. And for everything you said, that was very, very sweet. I will say that I acted up more than I acted. So how about that? So thank y'all for putting up with my vaudeville joke. That's how I run. Christy and Maya are going to read from their memoirs first, and then they will start their discussion. Maya is going to start with us tonight, and I want you to see the cover. There we go. That's a good shot of her beautiful memoir. Maya Shanbhag Lang is the author of What We Carry, named a New York Times Editor Choice, a Good Morning America Mother's Day pick, and a Best of 2020 by Amazon, Parade, The Times of India, and others. She is also the author of The 16th of June, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and named a must-read novel by CBS and InStyle. In 2021, the American Civil Rights Museum named her a woman you should know for giving Indian women a voice. Lang's work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Times of India, and others. After graduating magna cum laude from Swarthmore College, she earned her MA from NYU and her PhD in comparative literature from SUNY Stony Brook. Her doctoral work involved French, German, and ancient Greek with a specialty in literary theory. A passionate teacher, Maya loves working with writers. She is the daughter of South Asian immigrants and lives outside New York City with her daughter. Will y'all please help me welcome Maya Lang. I'm going to find you, Maya. There you are, who will read from her memoir for us before the discussion. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Delane, for such a lovely introduction. I wanted to clap for this person that you're reading about who sounds so impressive and put together. And thank you everyone for joining us. Christy, I'm so honored to be here with you tonight. And thank you to the beloved River Towns libraries for hosting us, to the Hastings Library in particular, which is down the street from me. I apologize for all of my overdue books that I currently have, which I have many of. So I thought I would just read a very brief passage from the book. And just to kind of introduce it, I will say that I brought my mother home to live with me when she was in need of emergency care. She was a geriatric psychiatrist and a specialist in the aging brain, and had convinced me and my brother that she was on top of her early Alzheimer's and completely with it, and that it wasn't a big deal. And suddenly she needed emergency care, and her situation was much more dire than she had let on. I brought her home to live with me on an impulse. And this first excerpt I'm going to read was a few months into her stay with me. One morning, my mother makes herself a cup of tea. I am ecstatic. After weeks of showing her how, weeks during which I'm not sure she retains a thing, weeks during which I wonder why I bother, watching her finally do it is as jubilant a moment as when my daughter took her first steps. The episode also drives home our reality. You made yourself tea, I crow. I did, she replies blankly. She doesn't remember making it, can't say how the still warm mug came to be in her hands. The accomplishment marks a ceiling in an ever-shrinking space. A woman who once saved lives as a physician can now do no more than make tea. It's bittersweet, like building sandcastles on the shore. All that work speaks to its own pending erasure. The episode with the tea helps me grasp my situation, though. I cannot fathom my mother's disease, can't wrap my mind around what it and our living arrangement mean. But a small anecdote involving tea is manageable. It gives me a story, a way to explain the ineffable. It gives me a few lines when the rest of the tale is out of reach. Alzheimer's is devastating because it annihilates one's story. It vacuums it up. Even the name feels greedy to me. What always gets me is the apostrophe, that possessive little hook. It drags your loved one away from you. My mother no longer belongs to me. She belongs to her illness. My time with her is a way of countering that apostrophe. The episode with the tea, in giving me a story, allows me to stake a claim on her. The magnitude of the ocean is overwhelming, but a sandcastle, however fleetingly, defies that power. Its beauty is only more poignant for its brevity. I cannot comprehend what is coming for my mother, the tidal wave of loss. But in the meantime, we have this, tea together in the kitchen. And even if she doesn't remember it, I will, which is enough to get me through the next day and the next.
Oh, I think we all need to take a breath. That was stunning. That was absolutely stunning. Thank you so much, Maya. That was gorgeous. I'm so thrilled that Christy Tate is here with us tonight. Christy Tate is a Chicago-based writer and essayist. She has been published in the New York Times in the Modern Love column, the Rumpus, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, Eastern Iowa Review, and elsewhere. Keith Lehman selected her essay Promised Lands as the winner of the New Ohio Review's nonfiction contest, which was published in fall 2019. Group is her first book. Will y'all please help me welcome Christy Tate, who is going to read from her wonderful new memoir for us.
Thank you so much for having me and for that really warm introduction. I just want to say that the public libraries have saved me over and over again. I was so bereft during the pandemic when they were closed, and now that they're opening, I feel new life in my writing, and my intellect is coming back to life. There's a particular, I go to the Blackstone Library in Chicago, and I wrote probably a third of Group at this little chair and this little table, and I'm so happy to get back. So this is a real honor to be here. And I'm just going to read the opening part where I first meet the therapist, who's sort of the shaman, we'll call him, for my therapeutic journey that unfolds in Group. I found Dr. Rosen's number in the phone book and left a message on his machine 2 hours after my dinner with Marnie. He called me back the next day. Our conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. I asked for an appointment. He offered me a time and I took it. When I hung up, I stood up in my office, my whole body shaking. Twice I sat down to resume my legal research, and both times I popped out of my chair 30 seconds later to pace. My mind insisted that making a doctor's appointment was no big deal, but the adrenaline coursing through me hinted otherwise. That night, I wrote in my journal, I got off the phone and burst into tears. I felt like I said the wrong stuff, and he doesn't like me, and I felt exposed and vulnerable. I didn't care if he could help me. I cared about whether or not he liked me. The waiting room consisted of bland doctor's office fare, an Easter lily, a grayscale photograph of a man stretching his arms outward and turning his face towards the sun. The bookshelf held titles like Codependent No More and Vandalized Love Maps and dozens of AA newsletters. Next to the inner door, there were 2 buttons, one labeled Group and one labeled Dr. Rosen. I pressed the Dr. Rosen button to announce myself and then settled in a chair along the wall facing the door. To calm my nerves, I grabbed a National Geographic and flipped through pictures of the majestic Arctic sea wolf galloping across a treeless plain. On the phone, Dr. Rosen had sounded serious. I heard East Coast vowels. I heard an unsmiling gravitas. I heard a stern, humorless priest. Part of me hoped he'd be too booked to see me for a few weeks or months, but he offered me an appointment 48 hours later. The waiting room door swung open at exactly 1:30. A slight middle-aged man in a red Tommy Hilfiger golf shirt, khaki pants, and black leather loafers opened the door. His face wore a slight smile, friendly but professional, and what was left of his wiry grayish hair stuck up all over his head, slightly reminiscent of Einstein. If I passed him on the street, I would never look twice. From a quick glance, I could tell he was too young to be my dad and too old to want to fuck, which seemed ideal. I followed him down the hall to an office where northern windows looked out over the multi-story Marshall Fields building. There were several patient seating options, a scratchy-looking upholstered couch, an upright office chair, or a black oversized armchair next to a desk. I chose the black armchair. A slew of framed Harvard diplomas drew my eye. I respected the Harvard thing. I'd had Ivy League dreams, but state school finances and test scores. To me, those Ivy League certificates signified that this guy was top tier, elite, creme de la creme. But it also meant that if he couldn't help me, then I was truly and deeply fucked. I'll stop there on that profane note.
Perfect. That was fabulous. Thank you so much, Christy. I'm going to add Maya and let y'all begin your discussion together.
Well, I have so many questions, Maya. I feel like I was reading your book and you just went to all the places that really strike at the heart of a woman's life. And I really identified the motherhood, daughterhood, writerhood, searching, marriage is somewhere in the mix. And I really appreciated all the truth telling you did. And I wanted to ask you first, you open the book the way my favorite thing that books do is when they open with an image or a metaphor or a sort of like a story that's going to hold a scaffolding. And there's a story that you tell that's a proverb that you'd heard, or I don't know, a parable you'd heard from your mother about a woman in the river and she's got a baby and the tide is right, or it's like she's getting up to her chest. Who does she save? And I just wanted to hear more about your relationship to that story. Was that originally the organizing image of your book, or did it come later? Or just, can you talk about that? Because it's so powerful, the way it repeats and the way you interact with it.
Thank you. And also, I have to say, I loved group so much. And Delaney, thank you for putting our books together, because it really felt like on so many levels, these books were sort of meant to be in conversation with one another. So I appreciate that. And I'm grateful for that. And so, yeah, the story of the woman in the river, was a story that my mother told me when I was a brand new mother and my daughter was all of, I think, 9 days old. And my mother, who was very scientific and clinical and introverted and, black and white and factual, had never told me stories before. So when she told me this story, it was a definite sort of moment. And I thought, oh, she's like giving me wisdom. And here's what's so funny. So that story is the prologue of the book. And then, throughout the book, I refer to it multiple times. And of course, at the end, there's a very different version that my mother tells me during her dementia. So in the writing of this book, I had several drafts of completed manuscripts that did not contain the story of the woman in the river. And I had no idea how I was going to frame the book and how I would end it, because when you're writing a memoir, you're living your life. And so the story is ongoing, unlike a novel, so you think well, how do I bring this plane home? How do I ground the whole thing? And one day I was walking with my mother on the aqueduct here in the river towns, and it suddenly dawned on me. I thought, oh yeah, Mom, you once told me the story of the woman in the river, and she remembered it. Sometimes memories in dementia, long-term memories get preserved. And she told me this very different version, and I stopped in my tracks and said, that's not how you told me the story. Within 20 minutes of that walk, I had written that chapter. I got us home as fast as I could. I wrote that chapter, and then I thought, oh, that's going to be the skeleton of this whole book. So somewhat hilariously, the whole organizing principle came at the very, very end. So yeah, books are funny in how they evolve. I was going to say to you, our books both delve into the therapeutic space, and we take the reader into the shrink's office and talk about difficult, weird, funny, moments of resistance and what we experience in that space. So I'm curious about the reception to that and how that's gone over, particularly among members of the group and how they have felt about it. So I was curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so I wrote about my experiences in group therapy, and I still go. And so those people, a lot of the characters in the book are still people in my life, and they're part of my mental health and wellness daily life. So it was really important to me from the beginning, to not keep a secret from them that, hey, I'm going to write about this. And the whole idea of this writing project happened in group. I had written a terrible, terrible novel about a young, lonely woman who was a lawyer, who was a lot like me. And it was like a weird kind of a thriller. It didn't know what it wanted to be. And she had a very intense relationship with her therapist. And I didn't know how to end the book. Speaking of ending a book, I didn't know how to end the book. So I just had this woman character and a therapist just have sex. And just that was it. And I mentioned it in group, and everyone was like, that doesn't sound good. And Dr. Rosen said, why don't you bring that ending in and read it to the group? So I bring it in, and I'm mortified. Brad in the group reads it, and everyone's screeching, like, make it stop. These are terrible words. And they're picturing me and Dr. Rosen in intimate situation, and it's totally inappropriate. And it was like, stop. And then somebody just turned to me and said, why don't you tell the true story? I go and tell the true story of the lonely woman and her therapist and what happened. And so then I started working on the memoir. And I would send drafts to my group mates. And early on, they were amused. I think they were amused. No one thought it was going to be a book in the world. Then when it started to become like a more serious draft, and I was getting farther along in my career and getting editing help, and I was really committed to it. I would send them drafts, and then they were starting to peek at them. They're like, what is she saying about us and what we do here? And it's been a really evolving thing. Like before, when I got an agent and it seemed like, Christy's little project might become a book at Costco, then people were starting to really, really read it. And one guy, this sticks out of my head. This one of the guys, Brad, none of the real names, none of these are real names. So Brad says, I'm really mad. Christy's exploiting us. She's taking our material and she's put it in a book and she's going to capitalize on it. Like all these really scary words. And I just sat there and Dr. Rosen's like, breathe, talking to me, breathe, just breathe. And I said, I will send you my most updated draft and then we should talk about it. So he reads it over the weekend and comes back to group on Monday morning. And he was like, I read Christy's book. I think it's really awesome. I'm pretty pissed. I'm not in it more because I really helped her more than she let on. I was like, wait, 48 hours ago, you were mad at me because I was exploiting you. And now you're mad I didn't exploit you more. But what I had done to make it my story is I changed everybody's identity and I took out the pieces of their story that didn't belong in our interactions. So the reasons why they're there, the work that they did, the prescriptions they got, none of those are in there unless I had explicit permission. And I just took that stuff out and tried to tell my story. But it's really, if anything they would have wanted me to take out, I would have taken out. I did not get any requests for that because I would have done it. I mean, I gotta be able to look these people in the eye. So
yeah, it's funny. Both of us, so in addition to us both writing about therapy, we're both kind of unwilling or unplanned memoirists. So you started this out as a novel.
Yep.
I was in the middle of working on my second novel when my mother came to live with me. And the passage I read at the beginning was initially a Facebook post.
Oh.
Because my life changed so drastically. Like I went from being just the mom of a young daughter who had like this typical suburban life to suddenly having a dementia patient in my home who was PS, my like iron-willed mother, geriatric psychiatrist extraordinaire, who, this isn't in the book, but she actually ran clinical trials for Aricept, which is the leading Alzheimer's medication. And that's the medication I would give her every morning.
That is so wild. I had a question actually about the that is so stunning, that scene where you say, I'll take her. And it almost feels like you didn't know you were going to say it, but you were just like, I'll do it. Was in your writing, was the time compressed? Did it really happen that quickly and that like on the spot? 'Cause that's so intense.
Yeah, it really happened that way. It really was this like blurting out of, I'll take her home with me. And it was automatic and kind of in the way that when your doctor tests your reflexes and they tap your knee and your foot just goes out, it was like that. It was that instinctive. And you have this line in your book where you talk about early on your inability to draw boundaries, if you don't mind my putting it that sort of bluntly. And you talk about how you want to be the good girlfriend and the good lawyer and the good daughter. And you say, yes was who I thought I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that moment when I said, oh, I'll bring her home with me. And I remember my brother's look of like complete shock. My brother, who's like the most non-reactive, boulder, granite faced person, just was like completely stunned. And I realized in that moment that, yes, it was ingrained in me that I should be a good daughter. And also part of this is sociocultural. I'd grown up seeing multi-generational homes where like, it's very much an Asian culture, a thing that like, you do not ever send, that's like the American thing, is to have your parents not be in the house. And like, as the daughter, you're supposed to do this. And I hadn't ever identified with that. I didn't know I was carrying it around in me. And if you had asked me, I would have been like, please, I'm a total feminist liberal. I went to Swarthmore. I didn't absorb these cultural messages. And my mother wouldn't have wanted me to be that person. She was a total feminist. And yet in that moment, I was just like, of course, I'll bring her home to live with me. So it's amazing how we act. We don't always know that we're carrying these things around until we're in these crises and things come out of us and we think, oh, and it wasn't really until much later, I would say now, that I've really re-examined that and thought, well, where did that come from? Why did I want to take care of her? Part of it is, I think, all of what I just spoke about, responsibility, absorbed messages, blah, blah, blah. But I think also I wanted to do for me what wasn't done for me. Like I wanted to care for her as a way of sort of addressing the caretaking and love and tenderness that had never occurred in my life. And there was something quite powerful about having these scenes of like tenderness and care and love, and like, I'm going to see you through your anger, I'm going to see you through your tantrums, kind of like the group therapy you describe.
Yeah.
And we're going to be here together in it. And that hadn't happened in my childhood. I'd never been a part of that. You have this line where you say, I'd never seen two people fight and make up. I'd never experienced that either. So I think it was almost as though I got to like have a dramatic reenactment of like the childhood love I should have had. And it sort of didn't matter that I was the one being the mom to my mom.
That's incredibly empowering. I feel like that is a principle. I'm sure there's a psychological name for it. I almost think it's called reaction formation, where I can't get into it because I won't know what it is. But the question I have for you that you just sparked in my head, do you think that it was this sort of social, cultural, like absorption of those ideas? Is that what kept you from feeling resentful with your brother? And because I was projecting my own relationship with my siblings onto this, and I was just like, why me? Why does it have to be me? And I didn't feel any of that like self-pity martyrdom from you at all. And I thought that was incredible. And did you write it out? Was it not there? How did you navigate that, coming with that sibling relationship coming out intact when you just did so much more labor?
Well, that's, I think truthfully, it's not that I edited it out. Truthfully, in the moment, I wasn't aware that he should be doing more. I mean, it didn't really occur to me. And part of what we've seen in the pandemic, quite frankly, is the way that women just take on these heroic roles, and suddenly we're like Atlas with the world on our shoulders, and we're already doing too much, right? But then we're like doing that exponentially, and we don't even know how we're doing it. It's like we're already juggling 3 balls, and then we're going to add 10 more, and you're so busy juggling that you don't think, dude, over there, you could take some of these, like you could. And part of that involves boundaries and saying no, and saying, I need help, or can you, making hard asks, which can be quite uncomfortable. I will say, when you were talking about sharing the book and it's the prospect of it with your group members, before my book went to press, I shared a draft of it with Manish, my brother, and I said, if there's anything in here that you want me to take out, tell me. I'm not promising I will, but I would want to know, because you matter to me. And to his great credit, as with you, he didn't say, take this out. He did say, oh my God, I come across as a total jerk. And I said, no, you don't. But I kind of thought, well, you could have done more. And the thing is that he said, I never knew that our father had been abusive to you, the way he had been to my brother.
Right.
So my brother said, I thought because you were like the great student and the responsible one, that you were like the good daughter who didn't get abused. And I said to him, I thought because you were the prodigal firstborn son, that you had never been the recipient of abuse. So it was this real moment of connection where we had both just assumed things about one another. And because of our age difference of being nearly a decade apart, we hadn't, he left for college when I was like 9. So we hadn't witnessed certain things. So I'm sure in the way your book, this is a question actually for you, is I was curious how your parents have responded to the book, which that can be fraught, but I think in some ways there are conversations and connections and sort of spaces that open up that would never have opened up.
Yes. Oh my God. I wish I could have talked to you like 10 months ago, right before my book came out, because I talked to other memoirists, but they were just badder ass than I am. Like, I don't care, screw them. And I'm like, everyone has to love me though. And so there's a softness about me that even when it comes to writing, which I hold very dear and I take very seriously, the people pleaser, I mean, I don't want to totally pathologize that part of me, but I didn't want to hurt anybody. I did not want to hurt anybody. I was not going to be able to enjoy whatever came of this book if I knew my ethics or my own sense of marring relationships. At the same time, my parents are very private and they don't think you should really even tell stories to anyone about anything. And I just wrote a memoir. So that's been a real struggle for me internally to say, this is what I wrote. And they're in the story, like tangentially. I certainly do not have a way of viewing my life. Like if my parents had been better, I would have never ended up in group. And when I had sent my parents an early version of the manuscript when I had the galley, right? So full of typos. Here's what I wrote, Mom and Dad. And I didn't say anything. I had written all these letters to put in there. And I just thought, I think all of my prefaces and all of my writings about what's in there felt like I was loading them up. Like, oh, you're not going to like this. Oh, you may not like me. And I just thought, just give them the book. That's the offering. That's my heart, And I told them, like you said with your brother, anything that you disagree with, or if I've gone too far into your privacy, let's totally talk about it, because I want to be clean. I want to go out into the world and look people in the eye and be able to come and see you and look you in the eye. And at the end of the day, they felt great sorrow. A lot of the things that are in the book, they didn't know about. So they had this sorrow that they couldn't have saved me. But we got to have the conversation where I said, I don't think you were supposed to save me. I think things happen to bodies, to kids, to children. And it wasn't their fault that I experienced trauma in several different arenas. And they, it's that trite thing of they did the best they could, but they literally gave me tools so that I could become a woman who could find what I needed. Like, that's the legacy that I see with them, that I knew I could ask for help. I figured out a way, somehow I figured out a way to pay for therapy when I was a law student living on loans. And that's what I got, some of that from them. Some of it's pure privilege, frankly, and some of it's debt that I'm still paying off. But so I think my parents, they felt, what I heard them say is they felt sorrow and they wish that I hadn't experienced that. And then my mom's like, but then you would have nothing to write about, which is true. And to their credit, they read it and we engaged around it. And how I feel now on the back end is I feel so much gratitude and respect for them. I have thrust them into a place they would never want to go. And they came with me, and they came willingly and with open minds and open hearts. And now they know me. Like, this used to all be a big secret. They would come visit me and I'd be like, I'm going to run downtown for 3 hours. And I wouldn't say I'm going to therapy, I'm going to group. Now it's all out on the table. Like, I'm not pretending like I'm not a person who goes to group. And so there's a lightness around me in our relationship that I don't know how I would have gotten there without the book, but it's a scary prospect. And anybody who's thinking of writing a memoir should talk to other memoirists, because this is part of the job.
That's
Well,
so beautiful.
it's interesting.
And Maya, can I jump in with a question from Kira, who
Yeah, I was just
dovetails?
about to ask. I was going to go there. I was just about to do that. So
Oh, sorry. Well, then go ahead with what you're going to say. I'm so sorry.
No.
No,
I was going to say, just because that's such a perfect segue into Kira's beautiful question, what Christy was just saying. And I think in a way, what you just talked about is really the kind of message of your book being performed, right? That we don't want to carry secrets. Life is just so much easier and freer and lighter when we have everything it out in the open. So Kira's beautiful question, was it an internal struggle to decide to write this memoir and share all of this? That's a question to me and to both of us. Did you know while you were writing that so many readers would so easily connect with your writing? So to the first part, so I was in the middle of writing my second novel. My mom comes to live with me. I start doing these Facebook posts, which get like shared and, you know, spread on Facebook, and an editor started following these posts and reached out to my agent and said, would Maya be interested in writing a memoir? And I said, no way. There's no way I could ever do that. I'm a fiction writer. And P.S., like there was a total inner literary snob in me. A PhD does not help with this. That thought like, I don't do memoir. I'm a real author who does fiction. So snobby. And then literally that same night, I wrote something like 50 pages. And I thought, oh, there's stuff here. And I've been totally just like shoving it behind a door. And even that kind of inner literary snob in me didn't want to go there and write about my own life and my own self. And once I did, I had this feeling of like, I need to write about this. And to answer like kind of the other part of your question, Kira, I mean, I think, and this is what I tell my memoir students, when you're telling your story and you feel like you are being true to that thing that lives inside of you, and you use that as your compass, when you're being faithful to that and have fidelity to that, I think there's no way that you can go wrong, because what you're doing is telling your truth and how you felt, and no one can object to that. They may have felt other things, but your job isn't to tell the story, you're telling your story. And while writing it, I had no idea. I had blinders on, so I didn't even think about the fact that this book was going to be published, which I think was a little bit of an act of like self-deception. I don't know how I convinced myself, because the editor was already interested, and, you know, yeah, the one thing I will say is that while writing it, I did have this kind of feeling or sense of like the reader on the other side who would need to hear the difficult thing about postpartum depression, or about caring for a parent, or about, you know, whatever it was that was like so difficult to write. I would kind of feel the person who would like need to hear that difficult thing. So that was helpful.
Yeah, I would say too, I was picturing the 20-year-old, I was writing to my 27-year-old self who didn't know there was any solutions, who didn't know lives could change, who thought, okay, you get to stop purging and you can have this much recovery in a 12-step program and you can be a lawyer, but that's all you get. So I was writing to, I could just picture this woman, like she's kind of foggy, but it was essentially, you know, can get stuff done, can do a job, can do well in school and go make things happen in the world. But on the relationship, personal side, just couldn't make relationships last like in a way that looked like it just happened for everybody else. And I also, as I got closer, I remember I went to this workshop and people were workshopping it was all memoir, thank God, because I too am a snob. I'm like, I'm gonna write a novel. Like I was just gonna use writing this book to teach myself the principles of storytelling. Then I was gonna go write a novel, like a real book. I kept calling this, there was group and then there were real books. And one of the things I thought was, I remember saying to this guy, because he said it back to me on my publication day, I was like, does the world need another white lady talking about therapy? And he was like, I don't know, like tell your story well and we'll see. And I just felt like I wasn't sure that people would connect to it. I had no idea. I also didn't know, I don't know, you may have had this experience too, Maya. I didn't know that people write emails to authors, like long emails with all kinds of content. And it has been such a privilege to receive people's stories about, I'm sure you get them, people who are caretaking and suffering from postpartum depression. I just didn't know people were going to reach out to me and tell me about trying to find a therapist or trying to find group or having an eating disorder, being at Harvard Law School, and all of those stories. I just felt so joined and so part of a whole community of people. And it would never have happened if strangers hadn't reached out to me. And some of the people are like, I hate your therapist. Some of the people are like, I hate you. I'm just like, that's still honest engagement that I appreciate. I had lots of feelings about it, but it really blew me away, the way that readers are hungry and they want to connect with the people who write these stories. I did not know that.
That's a great jumping off point for Sarah's question about connecting with people. Sarah, do you want to speak to Maya and Christy?
Yes, I'm in the MFA program at Manhattanville right now, and much of my fiction workshops have been very, very helpful and very specific, with certain issues that come up. And so I was wondering if you're experienced writers, so if and when you encounter obstacles in the writing process, like with setting or with characters or the narrative itself, did you get feedback from other writers, or did you ever think of joining a writing group? And does that help?
So I will answer this in the hopes that it empowers you and anyone else in the group who's listening and who's maybe in the middle of writing a book or thinking about writing a book or scared to write a book. So I never have belonged to a writing group, and I've never taken a fiction writing workshop. And I think actually that I'm glad for those things, because I know that there are all of these rules that come up in MFA programs and in workshops. And I think often in working with my students, what I see is that they will have something in progress, like a manuscript in progress. And I'll feel something on the page when I read their work. I'll say like, oh, that's a really I can feel that moment sort of vibrating with possibility. There's something going on there. And why did you stop? Why didn't you go there? And the person will inevitably say, oh, well, because when I workshopped this piece, I got told that, blah, 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 blah. And so I think two things. I think, first of all, whenever there's a writing rule, for whatever it is, I can find 10 glorious exceptions. So a lot of these rules are just frankly from people who haven't read that much. And, I don't mean that, well, I don't really care how it sounds. I think it's just true. All these, the rule that you should never have a character wake up in bed because that's boring as a way to start. Well, hello, The Metamorphosis by Kafka. That's how that opens. But, so I actually think that in writing, the most important thing is when you have those moments of feeling like something isn't working, and there's that anxiety of what do I do, or how do I fix it? It's very similar to that moment with a therapist, or the moment in life when you feel what do I do here? And I need advice, and I need someone to tell me what to do. And the truth is that no one can fix that except you, which can be an empowering thing to hear, but it can also be a deeply frustrating thing to hear when all you want is an answer. But I think the true solutions are never going to get given to you by someone else. And I do think what I teach my students to do is, in those moments, when you're struggling, when you have an obstacle, is to write about the writing. Because if you are a writer, and if that's your way of processing, then when you have trouble with writing, I think the answer is writing. And I think to engage with the demons and to bring them into the room and to write about them, that's the best way to tackle them.
I totally agree. I actually just saw today on Instagram, Kiesi Lehman, he wrote something along those exact lines about on writer's block. if you're blocked, what he says he does, and I'm paraphrasing, is he spends time with the block. He writes about the block, what's it made of, write through it, and then look back and say what happened. Because just like Maya said, if you are a writer, then writing is a way to process it. And so use who you are to write about the struggle or the block. And I actually have been in a writing group for a long time, and I workshopped some of the pieces. What I would say about that is I had to really trust them. I had to really trust them because I'm fairly sensitive. And if somebody had come at me with if it had struck me the wrong way, it would have shut me down. And so I workshopped a lot of little essays with them before I was like, I also wrote a book. Can you look at some of the pages? That was really helpful. And at one point, it was like 2 years in, I had a manuscript, and I was like, I think this is pretty good. I don't know. And I started querying agents, and there was very little interest. And the feedback I got back was that it was superficial. It felt like it was funny, I had a good voice, but there was no real transformation. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. I have no idea how to do that. And I did what is like a manuscript boot camp type of thing. I did it with Lydia Yuknovich, who does a lot of classes like this. And we workshopped our first 130 pages. And what made that possible for me, as scared as I was, it was like, well, the book either dies here, or I bring it through this process through these other people, and I see what life is there. Where is the heartbeat? Where does it vibrate? And what the kind of feedback I got was like Lydia would circle things and she would say, you can't just say, I ate a lot of apples at night and keep going. Like, that was literally what I had in the first draft, or the one that I was workshopping with them. The whole thing was like 200 pages because I wasn't going into scene. And she said, well, what did it look like when you binged on apples at night? I was a binge eater. I was eating apples, like 12 apples a night. And she was like, well, show us what it looks like. And it wasn't prescriptive. It was just like, it would be interesting to see a scene here. What if you lingered here? What did this look like? Where was your body? There was a lot of places in the margin where she wrote, where is your body? And the other feedback I got was that, this may not shock any of you listening, I would make jokes when things got intense. I would make jokes and then cut out of the scene instead of really lingering in the emotion and what was happening. And I actually did that in my real life. It turns out what I was doing in therapy that was keeping me stuck was what I was doing on the page that was keeping me stuck, which is not fully present, not like cracking a joke when I'm uncomfortable, which is not a pathway to deeper intimacy. And it's not a way to engage readers who are like, well, if you don't care about this, why do I care about this? So I'm definitely pro writers group for me, but I had to really, if they had been a different kind of writers group that didn't give me lots of praise before giving me opportunities, I would have shut down completely.
What great questions that were. Those were, God. Marcia, do you have a question for Maya?
I do. Hi, Maya. Thank you for doing this. So putting the science aside, did you feel like your mom was doing an internal processing of her own life or her emotions, since she was like an academic intellectual in her healthy life or her physically healthy life? Did you feel like there was more internal processing on her part?
Thank you for the question, Marcia, which is such a thoughtful and insightful question.
Thank you.
In my mother's case, I think what happened was that, her whole life, she had really presented herself to me in particular, but really to the whole world, as this mythic person. She was the person who would never admit to having overdue library books or to mistakes or to, anything. She was a force of nature, and she put herself forward that way. And on one hand, that was great for me to see growing up. I'm not someone who ever had like imposter syndrome when it came to sort of professional things, because I'd seen that modeled for me. I mean, my mother just kicked butt when it came to work. So I knew how to do that. But she had also never been vulnerable. And in many ways, she'd never been honest.
Mhm.
And in the book, when you write a memoir, you kind of open a can of worms, and the opened can gets like frozen in time for the reader, but you continue to live your life and examine the contents of that opened can. So yeah, in the book, I refer to these like myths that she put forward, but truly they were lies. So I've since learned, so like with motherhood, she always said to me when I would ask her, like, how did you do this? You came to the States as a medical resident and you had my older brother who was just a baby. And like, what did you do? And she would always say, like, I don't know how I did it. I just did. And later I found out the answer. I've continued to learn more about this, which is that my brother spent the first 5 years of his life in India. And for her to have withheld that from me, especially when I was a new mother with postpartum depression, which she as a psychiatrist knew what that meant, for her to have still not told me speaks to, I think, what Christy talks about in her book, which is secrets and the shame, like the 2,000 pounds of shame that come with secrets. And once you've had them for so long, she didn't know how to tell me. She didn't know how to go back and say, like, actually, by the way, I didn't actually do it. Someone else was raising him, mainly like your maternal grandparents and all of your relatives in India. She didn't know how to do that. So I think what dementia did was take away her armor and take away her ability to lie, which was a profound gift, right? It's sort of like an actor taking off their costume and just sitting down. And so I think in the same way that every crisis has its strange gifts, I mean, Alzheimer's really revealed my mother to me for the first time. And I saw her as this culpable human being who, of course, she had struggled. Of course, she'd had difficulties. Of course, she'd wrestled with these things. And she'd needed to ask for help and needed to find solutions. But she liked how much I put her on a pedestal. She enjoyed being perceived as this brilliant, fantastic mother. And because I had such an identifiably horrible parent in my father, who was physically abusive, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, I sort of, as a young kid, looked at my mom and thought, okay, you're it. You're going to be the awesome parent because I need an awesome parent, and tag, it's you. So truthfully, my mother could have done anything to me when I was a small child, and I would have, like, later in life described it as parenting genius. She could have, like, airdropped me into a forest in Lithuania and left me there for a month, and I would have been like, she knew not to helicopter parent. She knew how to give me skills to trust myself. It was genius. So, I think kids come up with stories as a survival mechanism. And then later we unpack those stories and re-examine them.
I'll say one of my favorite parts, I keep saying there's so many favorite parts of your book, but when your daughter asks you, Mom, did you always want to be a writer? And your impulse was to be like, yeah. And then you, like, edited yourself on the page, and in the conversation with her, you're like, well, actually, I thought I wanted, I got a PhD, and you did PR. You had these other aspirations before the writer, and you grew, but you were pulled toward a myth about your own writing life. That I loved that moment, that we can decide we're going to, like, move forward in truth and let go, like, we're going to model for our kids, like, the truth, capital T. And it's still really hard to just tell simple truths sometimes, because I like the myth more than I like the truth.
Oh my gosh. And I think, like, this is not something that, every day this comes up in small micro ways, right? Like, I think especially as parents, we want to reassure our children. We're kind of like the pilot of the airplane, wanting to be like, don't worry, folks, this is just a little turbulence. Like, we want to do that. And sometimes that's appropriate and necessary, and everything has to be age appropriate. But I also think I've seen the costs of when parents present themselves with a lot of curating and editing and smoothing over. And to be able to say to our children, oh, I had no idea in my 20s. I was lost and confused. I had absolutely no idea how I was going to end up where I ended up, or to say to them, I really messed up the other day. I'm sorry for what I said, or, you know, whatever. To have these moments, that opens doors for them for what they feel is possible. And who we are, more than what we say to them, who we are and the choices we make, that models things. So yeah, I think radical honesty does more for us than anything else.
I think that's true. I think it's not easy, but it's so true.
Well, both of you very much managed that and did it so beautifully in your gorgeous memoirs. Group, Christy Tate's memoir, and What We Carry, Maya's memoir. Pick them up, put them on order at your local libraries, get them where you get books. And I want to thank Christy and Maya. Will everybody please unmute so that we can all thank them together for being with us tonight. This was such a beautiful, warm, profound hour. I felt like I was enveloped in the beautiful truth of your memoirs, and it was such a gift. Thank you. I want to thank the Hastings Library, the Dobbs Ferry Library, and the Irvington Library for making this possible. And do not miss these books. If you haven't read them yet, get them, share them with friends, have them at your book club. I know Christy and Maya, I'm speaking for y'all, sorry, would love to join your book clubs. More great discussion to have. So thank y'all so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great night.